Welcome to Stories for Us, and on this episode we'll be talking about Sokushinbutsu, which is a ritual in the Buddhist religion. Now, this sacred ritual is mostly practiced by the Buddhist monks, which are basically extreme practitioners of the Buddhist religion. Now, in the Buddhist religion, it's basically life is seen as sort of a vicious cycle of life, torture, and then death. And to escape the cycle, there's something called nirvana, and this is what these monks set out to do with this ritual. Basically, monks leave behind all of their worldly life, like this, their materialistic life. They leave behind their families, they leave behind their jobs, their status. They go live in a temple, and they practice sort of meditation and to gain just discipline and live a very simple lifestyle. The belief with this ritual is that nirvana can actually be achieved through physical pain, and it's basically a torturous method where you're torturing your body through sheer discipline. You have to get through this, and at the end, you may be able to achieve nirvana. It's not even guaranteed. So you don't even know if you achieved nirvana until the ritual is complete, until you've put yourself through this torturous ritual. Now, there's 3 steps to this ritual, and we'll cover each step. Now, before we get into the steps of this ritual, or phases rather, it's important to mention that the Buddhist monks can actually choose to go through this. This is completely optional. Now, this is not the only way to achieve nirvana, but it is the only distinct pathway in which by the end of it, it's either a yes or no, and you won't know until you've actually completed it. It's important to notice that around 100 monks have actually attempted this, and only 24 have achieved nirvana. That doesn't mean that 24 have completed it, but 24 have achieved nirvana. I'm sure you're wondering, how would one know if they successfully achieved nirvana or not? We'll get to that at the end, but for now, let's look at phase 1. Phase 1 is known as the tree eating phase, where the monk actually goes out and they're only allowed to eat things from trees, such as branches and twigs and things of that nature, and the monk has to go out and find this food themselves. Now, it's important to note that at the same time where they're only eating twigs and leaves and berries and things of that nature, they have to stick to an extreme exercise regimen, which is practiced at the exact same time. So while they're malnourishing their bodies by only eating things like twigs and berries and leaves and anything that they can find, they're also going through extreme exercise at the same time. And it's also been noted that sometimes the monks will eat little rocks just so that they can get rid of that feeling of hunger, because those little rocks actually fill up their stomach and they kind of just take place in their stomach, and this sort of puts out that they're more full than they actually are. But these rocks aren't actually properly digested, therefore they don't count as food, and therefore the monk has still obeyed phase 1, which is the treating phase, which you can only eat things from trees and from bushes and things of that nature. Now, it's also important to note that they're doing this for 1,000 days at least. Monks can choose to go on for longer if they don't think they're ready for phase 2, so they can take as long as they want, but they're doing this for at least 1,000 days, this diet and this extreme exercise. In fact, it's not surprising to know that many monks actually die due to starvation because of the fact that they just can't find enough food to eat, because all they have to basically scavenge for is these little berries and things of that nature. And after this phase is complete, so after the 1,000 days is done, the monk can actually choose to go on to phase 2 or not. So they can choose to just kind of give up the ritual and then reattempt it at a different time, or they can choose to go on to phase 2. Now, phase 2 is known as the deep meditation phase, and basically, it might sound simple, but it's really not. What the monk has to do is sit and meditate for 100 days straight, and they would sit in sort of that classic like praying mantis pose. They get no food and they're fed a completely liquid diet. In fact, the liquid diet is a little bit of salt water, and then also they have to drink the specialized tea. This tea is actually made from a toxin that's also in the same plant as poison ivy. What this basically does to the monk is as they drink this liquid, it causes extreme itching inside the body, throat, and guts. And so basically, the monk has to meditate and practice extreme discipline to not itch this itch that you can't really get to because it's internal, it's inside of your body. And you have to do this for 100 days straight. This tea also causes extreme diarrhea, so at the same time, the monks are already malnourished, and at the same time, it's causing extreme diarrhea. And basically, the monks are losing all of their mass, everything on their body. They're dissipating. So there's no body fat, there's no sort of muscle left. It's very skinny, they're very frail because of the extreme exercise in phase one and the lack of food. And now there's no food and it's only liquid. And they have sort of the diarrhea causing even an additional burden on the body. And after this, there's basically no going back. Nobody ever reattempts the second phase. Nobody ever says, because they would basically kill them with 100% certainty. After this phase is completed and the monk does not die, they move on to phase 3. Now, with phase 3 comes even more meditation. In fact, now all the monk does is meditate. There's no food, there's no water, there's nothing. Basically, the monk sits in a meditation pose, and there's a box that's constructed to fit the monk, especially. So the monk would sit inside this box that's made for them. They're given no food, there's no water in the box. And what happens is the monk is actually sealed inside of the box with just a little hole at the top. And there's a pit that's 10 foot deep that's dug out just to fit that box. That box is lowered into that pit, and there's a bamboo stick, so a hollow bamboo stick that's used as the breathing tube. So the hole in the top of the box is fitted with that bamboo stick, and then the box is buried under charcoal, so 10 feet deep, charcoal on top, and then there's a hollow bamboo shoot that sort of sticks out of the ground and acts as a breathing tube for the monk. So the monk is in the meditation pose inside of this box, 10 feet down, buried in charcoal, breathing through this little tube. There's one thing that's given to the monk inside the box, and that's a bell. This sort of phase is basically called or can be attributed as the death phase, and I think we can figure out why. Basically, the monk has to die here. That's the whole point. The monk is going to die inside this box. Okay, now how does the monk die? It's not from suffocation, obviously, because they can breathe. The bell that's placed inside the box with the monk actually has to ring it once a day, letting people at the surface know. So there's other monks that are also at the surface that are keeping constant watch. They're hearing out for this bell. Once a day, the monk inside the box rings this bell, and that alerts the others to know and not do anything. So the ritual is not complete. The first day that the monks at the top of this hole don't hear the bell, they know that the ritual is complete. What happens next is that the monks at the top remove the bamboo shoot, so now there's no more breathing tube, and they cover that little hole, and they let the box sit for another 1,000 days with the monk still inside that box. Now, why would this be? After those 1,000 days have passed, the body is actually recovered, so they move all the charcoal out, and they bring the box to the surface, and they open the box. Now, why do they do this? It's basically the ritual is a self-mummification process. So what happens is the whole point is that the monk first starves themselves through this very restrictive diet. They're on extreme exercise to sort of pull away all the muscle from their body so that they're extremely skinny and there's not a lot of mass left to them. The second phase was basically the tea drinking phase, and what this does is the toxic tea actually kills away the bacteria in the gut, which are actually responsible for the decomposition of the body a lot of the time. So the whole point of that phase is to stop the decaying process for when the actual monk dies in that box. And then the third phase, obviously, is to leave the monk there and see if they decay or not. And the whole point they do this is to cheat death, is to remove yourself from the cycle of life and rebirth. And to become a mummy is to cheat death. That means that you have achieved nirvana. If you become a mummy, you're no longer part of this vicious cycle, and that's achieving nirvana. And basically what would happen is, after this monk comes up out of the box, they check for decay. If there's no decay, so if the mummy, like if the monk has now become a mummy, they have the monk has officially achieved nirvana, so they've passed this ritual, so to speak. And if there is any decay on the body, what would happen is they would get placed right back into the box, put right back into the hole, and buried. Basically, the monk is not considered to have achieved nirvana, and the ritual was not successful. And keep this in mind, only 24 monks have ever achieved nirvana out of this ritual. Please note that this ritual has now been banned and is not practiced, at least publicly.